I'm a native of Kansas City, Missouri, born here. My parents were immigrants from Mexico, specifically northern Mexico, Parras de la Fuente, Coahuila. Dad immigrated in 1957. Mom came in 1967, 68, and I was born in 1968 in August. And I attended preschool, Head Start at Douglas Elementary, and began my primary years at Switzer Elementary. Then bussed over to Douglas Elementary for a couple of years, and then attended Westport Junior in the 80s, and then finished up at Westport Senior High School in 1986. The makeup of my elementary primary years was mostly Mexican American. We did have blacks that attended the school. We did have a couple of major projects, and also there still was a pocket of black families that lived on the south side of the west side, around 31st Street. So we had blacks that attended, and we also had poor whites, what I would assume. We were just kids. But now that I'm an educator and know more about the Kansas City history, they were basically the poor whites that weren't able to flee the city, like the other more middle class or upper middle class whites that fled in the 70s and 60s. Westport High School, upon reflection, I remembered meeting a lot of folk from different places around the world and around the city. We had white kids, we had black kids, Latino kids. We still had international exchange kids that would come. I remember this one young lady was from France. Young girl was from France. And then we had Pacific Islanders who attended. We had Vietnamese and children from Laos and Cambodia. We had, there was a kaleidoscope club that brought in all of the different international students, and I remember there would be, we would have programming that would showcase the arts and music from the different places that were represented at Westport. I remember specifically the Pacific Islander dances, and I remember looking back, we had students from Afghanistan, because I remember them using this tabletop accordion type piano, and I thought that was the coolest thing to see because I'd never seen anything like that before. But we had a really good mix. During my time, we're talking the 70s and up to the middle 80s, efforts, I didn't see many. I mean, other than working with the kids in the communities that were there. Most of our teachers were white. I had quite a few black teachers, very few Latino teachers. I can maybe count 5 that I interacted with. Many of them were liaisons, translators. One principal, Dr. George Garcia, who was my principal at Westport Junior. Richard Esteves, I remember, was the principal at Douglas for a while. And but we did have the bilingual efforts. So once again, working with the communities that were there, we did have the bilingual teachers or bilingual specialists that were there to help us out, ESL specialists at the time. But efforts to integrate fully white students, I didn't see much of it. These were just kids that grew up in our community.
So what do you recall about the district's desegregation plan as a result of the 1985 court order desegregation?
What I noticed, and this is just me um, reflecting upon what happened after I left Westport in 1986. Mainly, it affected my younger siblings. I had a sister who was 1 year younger than me and a brother who was 2 years younger than me, who also finished at Westport 87, 88, and 89. So I believe that's the time when they started making brick and mortar changes, started building facilities to, I guess, attract folks from the suburbs to come back to Kansas City and to integrate more fully make that attempt more full. My siblings attended the classical Greek school. I remember that. He was learning Spanish, and that was one of the options. I believe that's when they were working on Primitivo Garcia as a world language school. Eventually, my sister attended what was West High School for a while as they were transitioning them into the new Paseo building. And so my youngest brother eventually graduated from Van Horn High School in the 90s, and my sister graduated from Paseo Academy, the new building. I know my parents weren't happy because, I mean, it was easy enough to go visit Westport. We lived on 21st Street. Westport was on 39th Street, so it wasn't too far to drive and integrate with engage with the teachers and meet with the building officials. But when they started busing out and moving the kids out to, now you're talking Van Horn, that's out near Independence, and then my sister over here, Paseo, where the old Paseo building was, near, the east side of the plaza. Mm-hmm. It became a little more difficult and challenging, but luckily they had a vehicle and they were able to make it happen. I think that effort split up our community more. Mm-hmm. when they were busing out to different areas, and these were options. These were options that parents were able to choose, but they didn't realize that those options included time and travel to the buildings that were spread out through the district.
So how did the Latina community respond?
Well, I know we weren't happy. The community wasn't happy in the 70s when the last remaining, it wasn't even a PK through 12 system on the west side, because West High School only went to 10th grade. And the only reason why I know that is because my dad, attended West and finished there and then transferred to Westport High School in the 60s. Parts of that building became mothballed. I remember only attending 6th grade up to at Switzer. They didn't have a middle school anymore. That's when they were sending us to Westport Junior. Not a good feeling to have your schools slowly but surely being shut down in your community. My parents at that time were really happy when we could walk to school. We had crossing guards. We had family members who lived on the block who were able to stand out there and watch us all walking by. I remember friends would come by, pick me up, or we'd go pick up someone, and it'd be a little walking bus that we would have to Switzer and Switzer Elementary. But when they started transferring us to Douglas, then we had to ride a bus, and then we had to ride a bus for sure when we went to Westport on 39th Street.
Now, where was Douglas located?
Douglas is located on 26th Street and Bellevue.
Okay.
Well, in my neighborhood, it's predominantly Latino. What I did notice as a kid is that very few of my white teachers and black teachers lived down the street. They didn't live in our community. They drove in and they would drive out. Mm-hmm. There were a few teachers that did live in the neighborhood and chose to live in the neighborhood. I knew of one teacher who actually adopted a child or two from one of the families in the surrounding neighborhood. But very few lived in the neighborhood. And that was something that, I really didn't worry about it as a kid, but it was, I always thought that teachers had their own space. For example, they had their own mall. The teachers went to their own theaters. The teachers had their own supermarket. That there was a teacher village, because I never saw them walking around my neighborhood. And that was just a childhood thought that I had, that, okay, they were that special that they had their own place. And I guess their place wasn't around my neighborhood. Well, I think school integration, I think our community provided quite a bit of opportunities for celebrations, for cultural knowledge, linguistic experiences. The opportunities were there, that knowledge was there. Not every school sought that out or celebrated it. We still weren't the majority at Westport in that area, but there were efforts to integrate us in our celebrations. I had teachers who personally invested their time and their expertise in me, both as a 7th grader and an 8th grader. I wasn't the most outstanding student K through 6. There were plenty of smarter kids than me, and I admired them. I admired their first generation, second generation, third generation experiences where their parents were already fully bilingual, no accents. They were fully integrated into the American community. And I admired that because I was fully integrated in my Mexican experience, my Mexican immigrant experience. So I thought that was better. But mostly the black teachers took me under their wing in preparing me for my future roles, my future leadership roles. I had no idea I'd become valedictorian. I had no idea I'd wind up being a professor, even though the kids would say, you know, Uzziel, someday you're going to become a professor. In high school, I had a history teacher who would always call me Dr. Pecina. And of course, I'd just laugh, whatever. And I just loved knowledge, and I had those counselors, those teachers, mostly white and black, who really encouraged me to continue to succeed. As a young administrator, and starting in 96 to 2000, 95 to 2000, we were still a contract alternative school. We were part of the De La Salle Education Center. They had made agreements with the Guadalupe Center to serve kids who had been pushed out, kicked out, or expelled from then various districts. It just wasn't KCPS, or Kansas City, Missouri School District back then. We had students who were coming from Kansas. We had students who were coming from North Kansas City and from some of the districts down south and east. So we had kids from different parts of the city and across the state line that we were serving as an alternative school. Per our agreements, we would then charge those particular school districts where they came from for the services we would provide in educating the children during that time. I do remember we sitting down with Dr. Marks and his administration of the late 90s as that transition to the magnet schools were happening. And we really were telling them, put us out of business. And some folks were kind of perplexed by that. Put us alternative schools out of business. In other words, serve the children that we're serving appropriately in your schools now. Find some way, some alternative school program that truly keeps the children in their community schools. And we tried. They wanted to partner with us. And then we did have some agreements, and we did have some students that we would serve at that time in partnership with the Kansas City Public Schools. during that time, I mean, I can't say with me, I only knew what I knew because I was at that age, and I expected that I was being prepared to go to college, because that has always been an expectation of my parents. They knew an education was very valuable, and they put all of their trust and hope in the teachers and administrators of the particular schools that we were in. Very rarely questioned them, as they felt that teachers knew better. Upon my graduation from Westport and heading to Kent State University, I thought I knew what was going on. I thought I was very prepared for the rigor of a four-year institution. Of course, I was very naive, knowing where I was going, originally an engineering major. And I realized in my first few classes that my writing skills weren't up to par, as the professor would often call those who were struggling down to his or her office, and we would talk about some of the things that I needed to work on. And so maybe that was just being a good professor and helping us out, but I noticed there were just a very few of us that were called out. I started noticing that, and I improved. I started noticing that I was struggling a bit in chemistry, and then had to withdraw from chemistry, want to go to general chemistry. I noticed that I was struggling in trigonometry, and I actually failed that class my very first semester. So I knew there were a lot of holes. I was figuring out there was a lot of holes. There was a lot of studying techniques that I didn't have, things I was noticing other students were doing that I didn't know, things that they were saying that I didn't know. And so I wasn't as prepared as I thought I was. Oh man, David Seals, my best friend and guitarist of our first high school band, called it fusion. And I would often go to his house when we'd go and practice, and he lived on the other side of Troost, on the east side of Troost. And then my other good friend, who was Vietnamese, Chong Nguyen, lived across the street from him. And so we would hang out with her family, and the many families who lived around the area who sent their kids to Westport. Hung out with the Seals family, and then they'd come to my house, and so that would be those cultural exchanges that we would have. And of course the white kids that were in my neighborhood down the street, and the kids who lived in the projects. That was very mixed, by the way. We had Latino folks who lived in the projects, as well as black folk and then white folk. So we had a good mix of people living in the projects that were just half a block away from my house. But what I noticed, that most of the Latinos lived in homes, and at the time, most of the blacks who lived around us were in the projects. I think if we would have had a better income mix of the educated whites, middle-class whites, middle-class black folk, educated black folk, if we would have held on to those Latinos who did get college education, who did move up within the social levels or socioeconomic levels, if we would have provided opportunities for them to grow and to continue to support the communities in which we lived in, I think we would have had a better socioeconomic experience among each other. I didn't hang out with professors. I didn't hang out with dentists. I didn't hang out with engineers, or we didn't. I think there would have been a tremendous amount of cultural experiences, socioeconomic experiences, if we would have held on to the integrated communities that existed in the turn of the last century. It wasn't perfect, as now a professor and researcher and studying my own city. It wasn't perfect, but we engaged with each other, and it didn't seem like a hateful engagement. I think we would have had a great experience. I know my family would have. We did have some teachers who would come and visit. Miss Betty Hudson, who was our favorite art teacher from Westport Middle. Would often take us under her wing, would often take us to her house. My brother and I would help rake leaves every fall, help her plant bulbs in the fall. And so it was a different experience. We were at a teacher's house. And so we learned a lot from that integration. Number one, we never knew what pumpernickel bread was, with sauerkraut and Swiss cheese. And I remember looking at my brother like, what happened to this bread? And when we ate it, it was absolutely delicious. It was something we never experienced. So we were able to get different experience and exposure from the teachers who took the time to visit our families and integrate us into their lives. I think we need to continue to provide opportunities for families to stay, provide opportunities for families to be integrated wholly within schools, to see us, we family and community members, as funds of knowledge, and to make any and all attempts to integrate us as much as possible, as we are a fabric and part of the learning community there at the school. The school would not exist if we weren't around it. The school is there to serve the community, not vice versa. And it has been happening slowly but surely, as all of our children have gone to the Kansas City, Missouri Public Schools. And I was challenged by Eric Leonard West, and calling him out and thanking him that I often would complain to him as he was getting ready to go for his candidacy or for the board, right. He was running for the board, and I would tell him all the things that I was complaining about. And he goes, "You know what, Uzziel? Rather than complain, why don't you do something about it, get involved?" And he challenged me. I go, "All right," and we did, and we have been ever since. All of the schools know that the Pecinas can be integrated if invited, and will be part of any and all types of situation solutions and problem solving, and that we're a family that's going to be there to support all of the children within that school. It works. It's needed. It has to happen. It must be purposeful, and we need to make it happen here in Kansas City. It has to. I learned a lot from that diverse experience at Westport. I wish I would have gotten to know many more of the families as a kid, but it's nice that I do now as a parent. We're talking to each other, we're listening to each other, we're seeking each other out for our expertise. We have architects, we have engineers, we have nurses, we have parents who are struggling. Parents who seek, my advice as an educator as they continue on with their education. It's a good thing when we have a really good, solid social economic mix within our communities.